Her fingers clung to the sheet like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. The air in the room was thick, every sound magnified. The quick, deliberate steps of nurses, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, the low hum of a voice urging her to breathe, to push, to hold on. Aurora's vision blurred, not from the sting of sweat in her eyes, but from the tears that refused to fall. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, each one a battle. She could feel her body trembling, the ache running so deep it was as if it had settled into her bones. A warm hand closed around hers, strong, steady, unshakable. Damien Holt didn't speak. He didn't need to. The pressure of his grip said everything. I'm here. You're not alone. When the doctor's words came, they cut through the noise like a bell for, all healthy, and all his... Damien's head dropped forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. His breath came uneven, as though he was the one who had just been through the fight of his life. His other hand rose, fingertips tracing the line of her jaw, pausing at her cheek. She could see it in his eyes. That man who had spent years behind walls no one could breach was gone. In his place stood someone who was quietly breaking, undone by the miracle in front of him. Aurora's lips parted to speak, but nothing came. There were no words for this moment, only the unshakable knowledge that whatever had brought them here had changed everything. She never thought she would feel this, not after the way her world had once been torn apart. And he, Damien Holt, had spent years convinced that the one thing he wanted most was the one thing life had taken from him forever. Yet here they were, holding on to the only thing that could save them both, each other. Before I take you into their journey, I need to tell you this. If you believe in love that fights through every storm, in second chances you never saw coming, and in the kind of courage it takes to start again, then make sure you subscribe to Mr. Ross' Story Trail right now. Because the stories we share here, they aren't just told, they're felt. Have you ever known what it's like to lose so much you stop believing there's anything left for you? To feel so empty, you convince yourself it's safer not to hope at all? That was Aurora's truth. That was Damien's truth. Aurora knew heartbreak so sharp it hollowed her out from the inside. Damien knew the quiet ache of a life that looked full from the outside, but behind the doors felt cold and silent. Two strangers, living in different worlds, yet carrying the same kind of invisible wounds. What neither of them could have expected was how fate would bring them face to face, not for love, not for friendship, but for something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves. And it began the night his eyes found hers across a crowded room, a moment so brief, so unexpected, that neither realized their lives had already begun to change. Before the joy of holding 4 tiny lives in their arms, there was loss. Aurora's story didn't start in a hospital room surrounded by warmth and love. It began in a quiet apartment where the walls seemed to echo with everything she'd lost. The man she once trusted with her whole heart had walked away without looking back, leaving her with debts, loneliness, and questions that would never be answered. She taught herself to smile in public, to keep her voice steady, to move forward even when each day felt heavier than the last. Damien's life looked perfect from the outside. The wealth, the influence, the name that commanded respect in every room he entered. But his own scars ran deep. An accident years earlier had left him carrying a truth few knew. The possibility of fatherhood was something he believed he would never have. His life was polished, yes, but it was also empty. A series of business meetings and silent dinners in rooms too large for one man. They had no reason to cross paths, no reason to speak, no reason to believe the other could be anything more than a stranger. Yet, all it took was one encounter, a single conversation, a glance that lingered a fraction too long, and the first thread between them was tied. Neither recognized it at the time, but that night would set in motion a series of choices, challenges, and moments that would test every wall they had built around themselves. This is how a woman who had sworn off love and a man who had given up on family found themselves standing on the edge of something neither dared to hope for, and how 4 tiny heartbeats would change everything. Aurora Blake had once believed in forever. She'd stood in a white dress, smiling through happy tears, believing the man beside her would keep every promise he made. 2 years later, she stood in the doorway of their apartment, holding a letter that ended it all in a handful of sentences. He didn't want the life they had built. He didn't want her. There was no warning, no fight the night before, no gradual drifting apart, just absence and the sharp reality that love, when it walked out, could take more than your heart with it. It took her savings, her sense of safety, and the pieces of herself she didn't know how to put back together. The months that followed blurred into a series of survival choices. She sold the apartment they once shared and moved into a small second-floor unit with thin walls and a draft that crept in every winter night. She sold her car. She learned to measure groceries by the week, to count coins before swiping her card, to stretch every dollar until it felt like a skill. She poured herself into freelance work, illustrating children's books for independent authors. Her tiny desk sat in the corner of her living room, half covered with paper, colored pencils, and coffee mugs she rarely remembered to empty. The characters she drew smiled in ways she couldn't. Friends tried to coax her back into the world, dinners, events, weekend trips, but she always found a reason to say no. She wasn't ready to face rooms filled with strangers, questions she didn't want to answer, and eyes that might see through her practiced smile. At night, when the city grew quiet, she would sit by the window, knees pulled to her chest, watching the street below. She told herself she was fine on her own. She told herself she didn't need anyone. And on the hardest nights, she almost believed it. Damien Holt's life had always been measured in achievements. He was the man who never missed a target, never left a negotiation without the upper hand. The city knew his name, the business world watched his every move, and yet, for all his influence, there was a truth that lived in the quiet corners of his life, one he never spoke aloud. Years earlier, an accident had changed everything. It left him with scars hidden beneath tailored suits, and a diagnosis that hit harder than any physical wound. The likelihood of becoming a father was almost non-existent. Doctors spoke in probabilities, percentages that hovered so close to zero they might as well have been nothing at all. It wasn't the loss of an imagined future that hurt most. It was the way people looked at him when they found out, with pity, with hesitation, with a subtle shift in how they saw his worth. An engagement ended not long after. He told himself it was better that way, that she deserved someone who could give her the family she wanted. But the emptiness lingered. No amount of wealth or success could fill the silence in his penthouse at night. From the floor to ceiling windows, he could see the entire city stretching out beneath him, lights glittering like distant stars, but none of them reached the cold space where he stood. Celine Marrow had been part of his life for years, sometimes close, sometimes drifting away, but never entirely gone. She was beautiful, polished, the kind of woman who belonged in every glossy photograph, but their connection was built on convenience, not commitment. Her presence was familiar, but it didn't warm him. Family pressure made the silence heavier. His mother's will tied control of the family trust to the continuation of the Holt bloodline. It was more than money. It was legacy, a name carried forward. Yet, with every year that passed, the possibility seemed more out of reach. And then, without warning, his path would cross with a woman whose quiet strength would shake the foundations of the life he thought he had accepted. If you were in Aurora's shoes, abandoned, betrayed, and trying to start over, could you trust someone again? Let me know in the comments. In another part of the city, the night unfolded in two very different rooms. On the second floor of a narrow brick building, Aurora sat hunched over her desk, a single lamp casting a pool of light over her sketchpad. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, coaxing color into the smile of a little fox on the page. Around her, stacks of half-finished projects leaned precariously, the quiet hum of her laptop filling the silence. Her small apartment carried the scent of brewed tea and sharpened pencils. The couch doubled as a bed on restless nights. The kitchen counter was a battlefield of unopened mail and paintbrush jars. Yet in that space she worked, steady, determined, the soft scratch of pencil on paper her way of keeping the world at arm's length. Across town, Damien stood before a wall of glass that framed the city skyline. The view was flawless, towers, bridges, and streets glowing in the dark, but it felt more like a painting than a living place. He loosened his tie, the day's meetings and calls already blending into a blur. His reflection stared back at him, sharp suit and tired eyes, a man who could buy anything except the one thing he had quietly wanted for years. It was a kind of symmetry. Neither could see. Two lives marked by absence, by the spaces left behind when love walked away. Two people who had convinced themselves they didn't need what they had lost. That night, as Aurora added the final strokes to the fox's tail, Damien poured himself a drink he didn't really want. Neither knew that, in just a short time, they would stand in the same room, breathe the same air, and share a glance that would shift the course of everything that came after. They were both living in quiet survival. They just didn't know survival was about to end. The next part of the story begins on a night that neither of them planned to remember, but would find impossible to forget. The venue glowed with warm light, voices blending into a soft hum. Tables lined the walls, each holding work from different artists, some bold and loud, some delicate and understated. Aurora's corner was modest, her pieces carefully arranged in neat rows, Each frame carried part of her heart, small moments, quiet joys, scenes where love was hidden in gestures rather than grand displays. Her favorite piece, First Launch, showed a young boy crouched by a puddle, paper boat in hand, his face caught between fear and determination. Beside it, a drawing of an elderly woman teaching her grandson chess radiated the warmth of shared time. Aurora adjusted one frame so it sat straight. She'd learned to focus on details. It kept her mind from counting how many people passed her table without slowing down. Tonight wasn't about selling everything. It was about proving she belonged here at all. At the far end of the room, Damien Holt moved through the crowd. He carried himself with the kind of quiet authority that drew notice without demanding it. Conversations paused as he passed, yet he gave no sign of being aware. His gaze scanned the displays as he walked, stopping briefly at the dramatic pieces before moving on. When he reached Aurora's corner, he paused. His eyes lingered on First Launch, taking in every stroke, every shadow. Aurora kept her focus on adjusting another frame, pretending not to notice the man now standing in front of her table. "This one," he said after a moment, still studying the paper boat. "Who taught you to see like this?" Aurora's head lifted slowly. His voice carried no idle curiosity, only genuine interest. "Small things saved me," she said quietly. "I wanted to save them back." He turned his gaze to her, and for the first time that evening the coolness in his expression shifted. "You did," he said. "You still do." Damien's gaze shifted from First Launch to the piece beside it. A cluster of woodland animals huddled around a lantern, their tiny faces lit with curiosity. "You draw eyes that speak," he said. "Even in the smallest details, they're alive." Aurora hesitated, unsure how to answer. Compliments about her work usually came padded with sales pitches or empty praise. This felt different. "Maybe because I look for the things most people miss," she said softly. He nodded once, as if that made perfect sense. "It's rare. Keep doing it." They stood in a quiet pocket of the room while the murmur of conversation rolled around them. For a moment, Aurora forgot where she was. It wasn't just that he noticed her work, it was the way he seemed to understand what it meant to her. From across the room, Celine Marrow spotted them. Her heels clicked lightly against the polished floor as she crossed the space with practiced grace. Her dress caught the light in deliberate flashes, her smile fixed in place. "Damien," she said smoothly, her voice warm but threaded with something unspoken. "You arrived without finding me first." He straightened slightly, offering a polite nod. "I was meeting an artist." He gestured toward Aurora's table. Celine's eyes skimmed the display, landing on First Launch for the briefest moment before moving on. "Charming," she said. "Very sweet." Aurora's lips curved politely. "Thank you." Celine turned her attention back to Damien. "They'll be starting speeches soon. You should join me up front." Damien glanced at Aurora's work once more. "In a moment," he said, his tone leaving little room for persuasion. Celine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll see you there then." She turned and walked away, the scent of her perfume lingering faintly in the air. Damien looked back at First Launch and repeated the title under his breath, almost as if it was meant for him alone. A volunteer stopped by to confirm sales details with Aurora, but before she could say a word, Damien reached for one of the small red stickers from the table. He placed it at the corner of First Launch without hesitation. "I'll take this one," he said, "and the chessboard piece as well." Aurora blinked, momentarily thrown. "Both?" He nodded. "Unless you're not ready to part with them." She shook her head. "No, I just didn't expect people to see what you see?" His voice was quiet, steady. Aurora lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. "I'd like to commission a piece. No deadline. Something about beginnings. Not the kind that demand attention. The kind that means something." Her answer came without thought. "I can do that." They completed the purchase quickly, red stickers marking the corners like small, silent victories. Damien remained beside her the whole time, not distracted, not glancing around for someone else. When everything was done, he met her eyes again. "Thank you. I'll be in touch about the commission." Aurora hesitated, then admitted, "I work from a corner of my living room. No studio, no perfect space." His expression didn't change. Corners can hold the best work. She slipped his card into her bag, its weight strange for something so small. Damien inclined his head slightly, then walked toward the front where Selena disappeared minutes earlier. Aurora began packing her work, telling herself it was just a sale, nothing more. Yet her mind replayed the way he had looked at First Launch, and at her. as though he had found something he didn't know he'd been searching for. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her like that. Damien sat in the polished stillness of his office, the city spread far beneath the wall of glass. Papers lay in front of him, though his eyes hadn't moved over the words in minutes. His lawyer's voice filled the space, calm, precise, but with an edge Damien couldn't ignore. "The conditions are clear," the man said, adjusting his glasses. "Control of the family trust passes to you permanently if, and only if, you produce a legal heir. If not, the board retains the right to dissolve your authority." Damien leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "I'm aware." "It's not a matter of awareness," the lawyer replied. "It's a matter of time. This clause was your mother's way of ensuring the Holt name continues. The board will not wait forever." Before Damien could answer, the soft chime of the intercom interrupted them. His assistant's voice followed. "Dr. Graves is here." The lawyer gathered his briefcase and left, nodding politely at the doctor as they passed. Graves was a man of few words, which Damien appreciated. They'd had this conversation before, and neither enjoyed repeating it. "The treatment is still viable," Graves began, settling into the seat across from him. "We've made some advancements in recent months, but your chances remain slim. Success would require a willing partner, and even then, the odds are unpredictable." Damien's jaw tightened. He didn't need numbers. He needed solutions. If there were someone healthy, willing, what then? Graves didn't hesitate. "Then we try. But the process isn't easy. It requires trust. Trust." The word lingered longer than Damien expected. In his world, trust wasn't given. It was calculated, measured, protected. And yet, in the quiet that followed, one face rose, unbidden in his mind. A woman in a simple dress, standing in a corner at an art event, speaking about the small things that had saved her. He didn't know her well. He didn't know if she'd say yes. But for the first time in years, Damien considered something that went beyond duty or survival. Something that might be personal. That thought unsettled him more than the condition in his mother's will ever had. Aurora was in her apartment, bent over a sketch of a little girl flying a kite when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the name on the screen wasn't. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Blake," Damien's voice came through, steady and deliberate. "I'd like to meet with you, privately. Would you be available tomorrow?" Her first instinct was to ask why, but something in his tone told her it wasn't a casual request. "Where?" she asked. "My office. I'll send a car." The next afternoon, she found herself stepping into a space that felt more like a statement than a room. Clean lines, warm wood, the quiet weight of success. Damien rose from behind his desk and gestured to a chair. "I appreciate you coming," he said. "I'll be direct. I have a proposition for you. It's unconventional, but I believe it could benefit us both." Aurora sat still, her pulse picking up. "Go on." He didn't soften his gaze, but there was no arrogance in it. "I intend to become a father, for personal reasons and because my position within the Holt family requires it. I have limitations, medically speaking, but there is a treatment option. What I need is someone I can trust to be part of that process." Her brows lifted. "You're asking me?" "Yes." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I'm asking you to consider being the mother of my child." The air between them seemed to thicken. Aurora leaned back, trying to find her footing. "Why me? You're healthy. You're intelligent. You understand commitment to something that matters. And," he added, "I believe you're capable of separating personal emotion from practical purpose." Aurora let out a short, incredulous breath. "You don't know me. I know enough," Damien replied. "And I believe you know yourself, well enough to answer honestly, whether this is something you could do." She looked away, her thoughts in a rush. This wasn't just unconventional. It was dangerous in ways she couldn't name yet. "I'm not answering now," she said finally. "I wouldn't expect you to." Damien slid a folder across the desk. "The details, read them. Then decide." Her hand hovered over the folder before she finally took it, the weight of the paper far heavier than it should have been. The folder sat untouched on Aurora's coffee table for hours. She'd made tea, stared out the window, even cleaned her kitchen. Anything to avoid opening it. When she finally did, her eyes scanned phrases like medical procedure, confidentiality, and financial provision. Each word seemed to echo louder than the last. By the time she called Clara, her oldest friend, her thoughts were tangled into knots. Clara arrived 20 minutes later, carrying takeout and her usual blunt energy. "All right," Clara said, setting cartons on the table. "What's this urgent 'I need you' text about? And why do you look like someone offered to buy your soul?" Aurora hesitated, then slid the folder across to her. "He wants me to have his child." Clara's eyes widened. Come again? It's complicated, Aurora said. There's a medical thing, a family requirement, and he picked you? Clara interrupted, leaning forward. Out of every woman in this city? Aurora pressed her lips together. That's not the point. That is exactly the point, Clara said, flipping through the folder. Do you even like him? Aurora thought of his eyes lingering on her drawings, the quiet way he'd listened when she spoke. I don't dislike him. That's not an answer, Clara said, pulling out noodles. Look, I get it. This is huge. But you need to decide if you're doing this for the money, the challenge, or something you won't admit out loud. Aurora ran a hand through her hair. I told myself I wouldn't let anyone close again. And now, this... Clara softened, her voice gentler. You've been surviving for so long, you forgot what it's like to make a choice for your own future. Maybe this is about more than him. Maybe it's about you deciding you can still build something worth keeping. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Aurora set down her fork. If I say yes, I need to know I'm walking into it with my eyes open. Clara smiled faintly. Then open them wide, babe. The clinic's walls were soft beige, meant to calm nerves, but Aurora's pulse refused to slow. She lay back on the padded bed, her hands gripping the thin blanket. A nurse adjusted the monitor beside her, speaking gently, though the words blurred at the edges. Damien stood close, jacket set aside, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He didn't crowd her, but his presence was an anchor she clung to. His eyes met hers once, a silent exchange. I'm here. You're not alone. Dr. Graves entered with a steady, deliberate pace. We'll move forward now. The process will take some time, but you'll be comfortable. Damien, you'll be able to stay with her. Aurora nodded faintly. Her chest felt tight, not from fear alone, but from the weight of knowing what this meant. Not just for him, but for her life, her body, her future. The procedure unfolded in quiet, careful steps. Soft lights measured instructions, the hum of the equipment. Aurora fixed her gaze on the ceiling, breathing slowly. She thought of her sketches, the fox in the scarf, the boy with the paper boat. Little things she created to keep hope alive, even when she thought she'd lost her own. At one point, Damien's hand slid into hers, his grip warm and steady. She squeezed back without looking at him. When it was over, she was moved to recovery. Damien pulled the chair beside her bed, leaning forward slightly. You handled that with more strength than most people I know. I didn't do much, she murmured. You showed up, he said simply. That's the part most people fail. She let her eyes close for a moment. The sterile smell, the low hum of the machines, and the quiet certainty in his voice seemed to fold around her like a blanket. For the first time in a long while, she felt the kind of safety that didn't have to be earned in exchange for something else. Neither spoke about the odds. They didn't talk about the contract or the board or the Holt name. They both understood that from this point forward, they were walking the same path, whether it led to triumph or heartbreak. 2 weeks later, Aurora sat in the waiting area, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had been to many appointments in her life, but none had carried this much quiet weight. The moment Dr. Graves stepped into the room, she felt her throat tighten. Damien was already there, leaning against the far wall with his arms loosely crossed. When she looked over, he straightened, his eyes locking with hers. No words passed between them, but his presence steadied the storm building in her chest. Inside the exam room, the nurse dimmed the lights and prepared the monitor. The gel was cool against her skin, and the wand moved in slow, practiced arcs. Aurora stared at the ceiling, afraid to watch the screen. All right, the sonographer began, her voice calm but touched with something she couldn't quite hide. I'm going to count what I see. 1, a pause. 2, another pause, longer this time. 3, Aurora's breath hitched, her gaze flicking to Damien. The sonographer's voice softened, almost reverent. And 4, it took a moment for the words to sink in. 4. Aurora turned her head toward the monitor, her eyes widening as she saw them. 4 small shapes, each with its own faint rhythm of life. A sound escaped her, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She pressed a hand to her mouth, unable to believe what she was seeing. Damien's hand found hers, firm and grounding. For a man who so rarely let emotion touch his face, the look in his eyes was almost startling. Wonder, disbelief, something that went deeper than either. You did this, he said, his voice unsteady but low. Aurora shook her head quickly. We did this, Dr. Graves smiled gently. All are developing well. This is rare, and it will require careful monitoring. But everything looks strong for now. Aurora could barely absorb the rest of the explanation. She just kept looking at the screen, memorizing every tiny flicker of life. She turned back to Damien. and for a moment, the world seemed reduced to the steady clasp of his hand in hers. When they left the clinic, he didn't reach for his phone or check his watch. He just walked beside her, silent except for one word he whispered as they stepped into the cool air. Miracle. In the days after the appointment, Aurora's world felt quieter, but not empty. Each morning, she found herself resting her hand over her stomach without thinking, a silent acknowledgement of the lives growing there. It was still hard to believe. Not just one, not two, but four. Damien checked in more often now, sometimes sending a driver for her appointments, other times appearing at her door himself. He didn't hover, but he made himself present in ways she hadn't expected. When she admitted she'd been too tired to cook, he sent over simple meals, nothing extravagant, but exactly what she could stomach. When she mentioned her old desk chair was giving her back pain, a new one arrived the next day. One evening, he stopped by with a slim folder in hand. "These are the latest reports from Dr. Graves," he said, placing them on the table. "Everything is on track." Aurora flipped through the pages, scanning words she only half understood. "It feels strange," she admitted, "to have so much going on inside me and not be able to see it for myself." Damien took the seat across from her, leaning forward slightly. "I see it," he said. "I saw it the moment they appeared on that screen, and I'll see it until the day they're in your arms." She didn't answer right away. That kind of certainty was foreign to her, something she'd never trusted in another person before. But sitting there, watching the quiet conviction in his face, she felt an unfamiliar warmth settle low in her chest. The more time they spent together, the more she noticed the small things about him, how he never checked his phone during their conversations, how he listened without interrupting, how his eyes softened whenever the topic turned to the babies. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. The life Damien came from was nothing like hers, and she knew how those circles worked, how they measured people by the wrong things. It wasn't a matter of if they'd notice her, but when. That moment came sooner than she expected. An invitation arrived for a charity dinner hosted by the Holt Foundation. Aurora hesitated, unsure she was ready for the kind of scrutiny that came with walking into a room full of people who all seemed to know each other's histories. Damien noticed her hesitation but didn't push. "If you're not ready, you don't have to come," he said. "But if you are, I'll be with you the whole night." In the end, she agreed. She told herself it was just an evening, nothing more, but deep down she knew it was the first time she'd step openly into his world, and she suspected it wouldn't pass without someone testing the ground beneath her feet. The Holt Foundation dinner was held in one of Damien's flagship hotels, the kind of place where chandeliers spilled warm light over marble floors, and every table was set with precision. Aurora arrived on his arm, her dress simple but graceful, chosen to feel like herself rather than someone else's idea of belonging. The evening unfolded with polite introductions, short conversations, and the hum of clinking glasses. Aurora stayed close to Damien, listening more than she spoke, measuring her words carefully when asked about her work. She was talking to one of the Foundation's education coordinators when a familiar shift in the air made her glance up. Celine Merrow approached, elegance wrapped in an easy smile. Her eyes flicked briefly to Aurora before landing on Damien. "Damien," she said smoothly, "you've been difficult to track down lately." Celine turned her attention to Aurora. "And you must be the artist I've heard about." Damien mentioned a commission. Aurora gave a small nod. "That's right." Celine's smile didn't falter, but her gaze carried a glint of something sharper. "It's rare for him to take such personal interest. You must have made quite an impression." Aurora met her eyes evenly. "I think the work did that." Celine's lips curved in acknowledgement, but before she could reply, Damien stepped slightly closer to Aurora, his hand hovering near her back. "We should join the others," he said to Celine, his voice still courteous yet distinctly final. Celine's smile thinned almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Enjoy your evening." As they moved away, Damien kept his focus on Aurora. "You handled that well. It didn't feel like a casual chat," she admitted. "It wasn't," he said, his tone low but certain. "But I meant what I said. You're not alone in this." The words lingered, steadying her in a way she hadn't expected. In a room filled with people who measured worth in whispers and glances, that simple promise was the only currency she cared about. They stayed at the dinner just long enough to be polite. Aurora spoke briefly with a teacher from one of the Foundation's partner schools, answering questions about how illustration could inspire children to read. Damien listened, his attention fully on her even while others tried to draw him into different conversations. When they finally stepped out into the night, Aurora breathed in deeply, the cooler air loosening the tension in her shoulders. Damien opened the car door for her, and as she settled into the seat, he paused before joining her. "You carried yourself exactly as I knew you would," he said once they were inside. She glanced at him. Meaning you didn't shrink and you didn't perform. You were yourself, and that's what matters to me. Aurora looked out at the city passing by, lights streaking across the windows. "It's still hard," she admitted, "walking into places where I know people are wondering why I'm there, whether I belong." "You belong," Damien said without hesitation. "And if anyone thinks otherwise, that's their problem, not yours." The firmness in his voice surprised her, not because she doubted his words, but because she realized he truly meant them. She turned back to him. "Do you always speak like that, without leaving room for argument?" "When I know I'm right," he said, and for the first time that night, a small smile tugged at his mouth. They didn't speak much for the rest of the ride, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that felt shared rather than empty. When he walked her to her door, Damien hesitated for a beat before saying, "Rest tomorrow. Let the noise fade. We've got more important things to focus on." She knew he meant the babies, but a part of her wondered if he also meant them. That night, lying in bed, Aurora replayed the evening. Celine's measured words, Damien's subtle but unmistakable defense, the way he stayed close without overshadowing her. In a world that seemed ready to measure her by all the wrong things, that quiet shield he offered mattered more than she could explain. If you were Aurora, would you confront Celine directly or trust Damien's word? Share your thoughts in the comments. The weeks that followed the foundation dinner were full of small, careful routines. Morning calls from Dr. Graves, short walks around Aurora's block, lists taped to the fridge, vitamins, meals, rest. Damien kept showing up, reminders on his calendar, a driver on standby. His own meetings shifted to make room for hers. It should have steadied everything. But steadiness is tricky when your life has taught you to brace. Some days, Damien was fully present, eyes on her, voice low, questions thoughtful. He listened to the stories behind her drawings, asked about color choices and childhood memories, memorized the titles of her favorite picture books like they mattered to him personally. Those were the days Aurora felt something bright taking root, something she didn't dare name. Other days he drifted, calls stretched late, messages arrived hours after she sent hers. He would sit beside her in the clinic and still feel far away, as if a door inside him had closed without warning. He didn't mean to be cold. It was the reflex of a man who'd survived years by compartmentalizing everything he couldn't control. Aurora told herself not to take it personally, but old habits argued back. One afternoon, she was sketching thumbnails for a new commission when her phone buzzed. A friend had sent a link with a single line of text. "Have you seen this?" Aurora tapped, and the image opened. Damien and Celine on a balcony at a past fundraiser. A candid shot, smiles easy, his hand resting at the small of her back. The caption wasn't cruel, just suggestive enough to do damage. Comments bloomed underneath, each one a little needle. The photo wasn't new, but it felt freshly sharpened. Aurora stared until the screen blurred, then locked her phone and pressed it face down on the table. She knew better than to listen to strangers, but the ache came anyway, the familiar tug that said she might be in someone else's world on borrowed time. That evening, Damien arrived with a bag of groceries and a quiet apology for being late. He moved through her kitchen like he'd done it 100 times, washing berries, setting water to boil, pulling a container of broth from the bag. He reached for bowls, then paused when he saw her expression. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly. He set the ladle down. "Aurora." She hesitated, then exhaled. A photo of you and Celine resurfaced, from before. People are talking. Silence settled between them. He processed the words, jaw tightening a fraction. "I should have warned you," he said finally. "Old images circulate. They don't mean anything now." She wanted to believe him. She also wanted proof that what stood between them was stronger than a past that loved to be seen. Damien turned off the burner. "Eat first," he said gently. "Then we talk." The broth warmed her hands. It did nothing for the chill working its way through her chest. The next morning, the photo was everywhere, not just in the corner of some blog Aurora had never heard of, but across feeds, tagged in casual gossip threads and reposted with captions speculating about the real story behind Damien Holt and Celine Merrow. Aurora didn't look for it, but it kept finding her, in messages from acquaintances, in polite half-questions from a client, in the sidelong glance of a neighbor who normally just waved hello. Damien didn't mention it when they spoke that day. He asked about her morning sickness, reminded her to rest after lunch, and sent over a link to an article about prenatal nutrition. He was attentive in all the ways that didn't touch the one thing sitting between them. That night she called him, thinking the conversation would happen naturally. But he answered with the muted edge of someone in the middle of a meeting. "Can I call you back in an hour?" She said yes. He didn't. The following afternoon he arrived at her apartment unexpectedly, holding a small paper bag with pastries from a bakery she'd mentioned once in passing. They were on the way, he said, setting them on the counter. She thanked him, but the question still pressed against her ribs. "Why won't you talk about the photo?" He met her gaze. "Because it's noise. I don't invite noise into my life, and I won't invite it into yours. That's not how it works for me," she said quietly. "You can turn it off. I can't. It follows me." His jaw flexed, a small sign of the control he kept on his words. "Celine and I have history. It's over. The photo is old. That's all there is to it." Aurora folded her arms, wishing the certainty in his voice could bridge the gap between what she knew logically and what she felt. "It doesn't look over in that picture. I can't change how something looks," he said, softer now. "Only what's true." They stood in the narrow space between her counter and the table, the scent of the pastries mingling with the faint citrus of his cologne. She wanted to close the distance, to believe him without reservation, but trust wasn't something she could summon on command, not after years of learning the cost of giving it to the wrong person. Damien seemed to read the hesitation in her face. He didn't push. Instead, he took one step back. "Eat something," he said, as if care could be reduced to simple instructions. Then he left, the sound of the door clicking shut far too loud in the quiet apartment. It was past 11 when Aurora heard the knock. She wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment she thought she'd imagined it. But then it came again, slow, deliberate. She opened the door to find Damien standing there, his hair slightly tousled, the top button of his shirt undone. His eyes searched hers before he spoke. "I couldn't leave it like that," he said. Aurora stepped aside, and he walked in without waiting for an invitation, though not in a way that felt entitled. He stopped in the middle of the room, turning toward her with an expression that was part apology, part something heavier. "I've spent most of my life keeping things in compartments," he began. "Work here, personal there, feelings. Somewhere I never had to look at them too closely. But this," his gaze dropped briefly to her stomach, then lifted again. "This isn't something I want to keep at a distance." Aurora stayed quiet, letting him find his words. "I didn't talk about the photo because I thought it didn't deserve space between us," he continued. "But I see now that not talking about it gave it power I didn't mean it to have." He stepped closer, his movements unhurried, giving her time to decide whether to let him close the gap. She didn't move away. When he reached her, he lifted his hand and let his fingertips brush her cheek. The touch was light, almost tentative, as though he wasn't sure if he was allowed. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull back. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Not of you, not of us, of being a father, of wanting it so badly and failing at it. But I'm more afraid of failing you by letting doubt get between us." His voice had dropped to a near whisper. She could feel the warmth of it on her skin, the faint scent of him filling the small space between them. Aurora's eyes met his. "I'm afraid too. But I don't want fear to be the loudest thing in this room." For a long moment they just stood there, no rush, no forced words. Then his hand slid to the back of her neck, pulling her into a kiss that was unhurried and deliberate, the kind that felt less like a question and more like an answer. When they finally broke apart, he stayed close, his forehead resting lightly against hers. "Let me try," he said. Aurora's voice was soft but certain. "Then stay." The third trimester came with a calendar full of appointments and a checklist that grew longer every week. Aurora had learned to read the sonographer's face, to watch for tiny changes in tone or timing. That morning, the room felt a little too quiet. The wand moved a little more slowly. Dr. Graves stepped in sooner than usual. He pointed to the screen, to the smallest of the four. "Baby D," he said gently. "Fluid levels are dipping. Heart rate is steady now, but I don't like the trend." He met Aurora's eyes. "We're admitting you for continuous monitoring. I want you close. We'll keep you comfortable and watch for any signs we need to act." Her throat tightened. "How serious is it?" "Serious enough to be cautious," he said. "But you're not alone. We have options." Damien was there before she could text him twice. He stepped into the exam room with his tie tucked into his pocket, an unfinished call still flashing on his phone. One look at her face, and he put the phone away for good. "Tell me what she needs," he said to Dr. Graves, his voice steady in a way that steadied her too. They brought a wheelchair even though Aurora could walk. Damien didn't argue. He simply set his hand on her shoulder and matched the nurse's pace down the hallway. The hospital room was bright and clean, with a recliner by the window and a monitor that blinked with quiet authority. A nurse wrapped straps around her belly, and the room filled with soft, fast rhythms, 4 distinct beats mapping out 4 small lives. Bed rest, the nurse explained. Fluids. We'll repeat ultrasounds twice a day. If baby D shows distress, we'll be ready. When the nurse left, Damien pulled the recliner as close as it would go. I'm not leaving, he said. You don't have to stay every minute, Aurora whispered. I have priorities, he said, and the way he looked at her made it clear which one mattered. He reached for her hand, careful of the IV line. We'll get through this. For a long time they said nothing. The monitor kept time for them, a soft chorus that filled the room with both fear and comfort. Aurora watched his profile, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes moved to the screen every few seconds, and felt the ache in her chest loosen just enough to let hope in. By afternoon, the board meeting had already begun without Damien. He was supposed to present new plans for the Foundation's housing initiative, a project he'd shepherded for months. Instead, he sat in the hospital room reading the latest notes from the nurse, his tie still in his pocket, sleeves pushed to his elbows. His assistant called to ask whether to reschedule the press briefing. Cancel it, he said. No statement, no comments. I'll handle it later. 2 hours later, a text pinged that Celine had arrived at the hotel where the meeting continued without him. She had a way of stepping into rooms that did not belong to her and making them feel like they did. He didn't respond. The second ultrasound showed the same concern. Not worse, not better. A limbo that left Aurora wrung out. When she finally drifted into a light sleep, Damien stepped into the corridor to give a brief update to the Foundation chair over the phone. I won't be in today or tomorrow, he said. We're monitoring a medical complication. My place is here. That will cause questions, the chair warned. They can ask, he said calmly. I'll answer when this is stable. He ended the call to find Celine waiting by the elevator, immaculate as always. Someone had told her where. To find him, someone always did. You're hard to reach, she said lightly. I thought I'd check on you. I'm fine, he replied, voice even. You shouldn't be here. She tilted her head, studying him. You're throwing away an entire afternoon of leverage because of a complication that may resolve on its own. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You're speaking about a child. Her lips parted, surprise flickering for a moment. Then the practiced smile returned. You're making this emotional when it should be strategic, she said. Your name, your legacy. My legacy, he said quietly, begins with showing up for the people I claim to care about. If you don't understand that, there's nothing else to discuss. The elevator chimed. He pressed the button for the door and held it for her. She didn't move. You're choosing her. I'm choosing what's right, he said. Go home, Celine. She stepped inside finally, face unreadable. As the doors slid shut, Damien let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, then turned back toward Aurora's room. Inside, she was awake, watching the doorway. Everything okay? Yes, he said, crossing to her bedside. Everything that matters is right here. Evening settled slowly, stretching the hours into thin threads. Nurses came and went with measured steps. Aurora's vitals held steady. Baby D's pattern dipped once, then corrected. Each small change felt like a mountain climbed or a cliff avoided. Damien paced the hallway more than once, not to escape but to think. One hand covered his mouth, elbow braced in the other palm, the posture of a man trying to keep control from turning into helplessness. A resident passed him and offered a quiet nod. He nodded back without speaking and returned to the room. Aurora watched him sit again, saw the strain at the edges of his composure. You don't have to be the strongest person in the room, she said softly. He dragged a hand over his face and let out a low breath. I don't know how to do this and do everything else. I've built my life on never missing a step, and now, I don't care if the whole thing sits on pause as long as you're all right. She reached for him, IV tape pulling slightly as she moved. He took her hand in both of his, holding on like he'd found the one thing that kept him steady. Do you ever miss being the man who had an answer for everything? She asked. Less every hour I'm here, he said. I don't want to be impressive. I want to be present. A nurse entered with an injection to help the baby's lungs if an early delivery became necessary. This may sting, she warned. Aurora squeezed Damien's hand. He didn't flinch. The nurse adjusted the monitor and smiled gently at the 4 heartbeats moving in uneven harmony. You're doing well, she told Aurora. Keep resting. We're watching closely. After she left, Aurora stared at the ceiling. If we have to deliver early, we'll do what's safest, he said. Whatever that is, and if the board pushes back, if people talk? They already do, he answered. They can talk. I'm not listening. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to her knuckles. I used to measure success by what I could control. Tonight I'm measuring it by whether you feel safe. He looked up, eyes clearer than they had been all day. Tell me what you need. Stay, she said. I will. Night gave way to a pale morning. The first scan of the day showed slight improvement. Not enough to celebrate, enough to keep waiting. Dr. Graves reviewed the chart at the end of the bed. We're not out of the woods, but we're moving in the right direction. Another 20 to 4 hours like this would be a gift. Aurora nodded, relief and fatigue tangling in her chest. Damien stood beside her, one hand resting on the rail. What can we do to help? He asked. Keep her calm, Dr. Graves said. Limit visitors. Hydration, rest, and no unnecessary stress. If we can buy a little more time, we will. They followed orders as if they were sacred. Damien fielded every call so she wouldn't have to, sending brief updates to the handful of people who needed to know. He asked the nurse for an extra blanket when he noticed her shiver. He ordered her favorite soup from a nearby cafe and coaxed her into eating a few spoonfuls even when appetite faltered. There was a knock mid-morning, a delivery, a small bundle of children's books wrapped with twine, and a card from a client Aurora had illustrated for the year before. Thinking of you. Your art has gotten us through more nights than you know. She laid a hand over the package and smiled through sudden tears. By afternoon, the monitor hummed with a steadier rhythm. Baby D's line still made her heart jump every time it dipped, but the dips were shorter now, the recoveries quicker. Keep going, Aurora whispered, as if the little one could hear her. Damien pulled his chair closer again. I was wrong about something, he said. I thought being a father started the day a child is born. It doesn't. It starts in rooms like this, with choices like these. She turned her head toward him. You're doing it. So are you, he said. He hesitated, then added, I'm sorry I made you carry doubt about us when the photo came back. I should have met it head on. You're here now, she said. That's what I needed. They sat in the quiet a long time, letting the monitor speak for them. When the evening nurse came to replace the IV bag, she glanced at Damien's wrinkled shirt and said, There's a family lounge at the end of the hall if you want to rest. I'm good here, he replied. Aurora squeezed his fingers. He stayed where he was. Morning arrived with a hush that felt almost sacred. Aurora lay in the delivery room, the steady symphony of monitors surrounding her. Nurses moved with calm purpose. Dr. Graves reviewed the plan one more time, eyes kind but focused. We're ready, he said. You've both done everything right. Damien stood at her side, fingers threaded with hers, sleeves rolled, tie forgotten. He had been here through the long nights and the quiet dawns, through every chart update and cautious smile from the staff. Now, as the room prepared, his gaze lifted to meet hers. There was no mask left, no distance, only a man who had chosen to stay, again and again. Aurora nodded through a breath, bracing as a contraction crested. He counted with her the way he had learned, slow even, his voice the anchor she trusted. I've got you, he whispered. We're almost there. The first cry broke the room open, clear, insistent, alive. Aurora exhaled a sound that was half laughter, half disbelief. Tears spilled before she could stop them. Damien's hand flew to his mouth, shoulders shaking once as if the air had been knocked from him. A nurse announced, Baby A, strong and perfect. Moments later, another cry, smaller but sure. Baby B. Aurora reached for Damien's wrist. He pressed his brow to her temple. You're incredible, he said, voice unsteady. You're changing my life while I watch. The room shifted into a gentle rhythm as the team worked with care and speed. Baby C, came the next announcement, and Aurora let out a trembling breath that turned into a smile she couldn't contain. Silence followed, not long, but long enough for every heartbeat in the room to matter. Then a fourth cry rose, thin, brave, undeniable. Baby D. Aurora closed her eyes. Damien's face broke open, wonder and awe written across features that had once been unreadable. He kissed her forehead and stayed there, whispering words that belonged only to them, the kind that reached deeper than promises. They're here, he breathed. You did it. We did, she whispered back. The nurses worked with gentle efficiency, checking each newborn and placing them in warmed bassinets side by side. 4 tiny faces, 4 tiny fists, 4 sets of lungs declaring themselves to the world. Aurora watched through tears she didn't bother to wipe away, every movement searing itself into memory. Do you want to meet them? A nurse asked with a smile that held back tears of her own. Aurora nodded and reached out. Baby A came to her first, cheeks rosy, eyes fluttering. She traced a finger along the soft curve of a cheek and laughed softly when the tiny mouth opened as if answering. "Hello," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you." Damien stood at the head of the bed, both hands braced, their eyes moving from one child to the next as if trying to memorize them in a single glance. A nurse placed baby B in his arms, and something in him seemed to fold and reform all at once. He had held contracts worth billions, signed agreements that shaped skylines, but the way he held that small body, careful, reverent, was the truest thing he had ever done. He looked up at Aurora, eyes bright. "You've changed everything for me," he said, the words torn free of restraint. "Everything." She reached for his hand. He threaded his fingers through hers while still cradling the baby close. They sat like that, suspended in a quiet that felt bigger than the room. When baby C's tiny hand wrapped around Aurora's finger, she laughed through a fresh wave of tears. "Stubborn," she murmured with affection. "Just like your—" She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. "Say it," Damien coaxed, soft as air. "Just like your father," she finished, smiling. Baby D, the one who had kept them on edge for weeks, yawned wide and settled, heartbeat steady and sure on the monitor. Dr. Graves glanced at the readout and offered a quiet nod. "All four are thriving." Aurora rested her head back, the word thriving echoing through her like a blessing. Damien brushed his lips against her hairline and stayed there, still clutching her hand as if he might never let go. News of the delivery traveled as these things do, softly at first, then with growing brightness among those who cared. Celine heard it the way people like her heard everything, quickly, completely. There was no scene, no final conversation. A message reached Damien later that week, brief and cool. She was taking an extended trip abroad. She didn't say when she would return. He didn't ask. What mattered lived in a quiet hospital room where 4 newborns slept in staggered rhythms, and 2 people learned how to be more than what their past said aloud. A few days later, discharge papers signed, Aurora sat in a private lounge, while the nurses taught her the choreography of swaddles and feeding schedules for 4. Damien listened, asked questions, learned the tiniest details as if they were a new language he intended to speak fluently. When one baby fussed, he was already there, hand sure, voice low. Aurora watched him and felt a deep steadiness settle in her chest, the kind that said they could build something good and keep it. On the ride home, the city outside moved at its usual pace, unaware that the world inside their car had tilted toward a new center. Damien glanced at her and then at the car seats secured with measured care. "I used to think family was a ledger," he said quietly. "Names and lines and what carried forward. I was wrong." Aurora looked at him, then at the sleeping faces behind them. "Family isn't about who shares your blood," she said. "It's about who shares your heart." He reached for her hand on the console and held it, their fingers fitting like a promise. If you believe love deserves a second chance, like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories on Mr. Ross Story Trail. Some stories end with a single choice. Others end with a slow accumulation of moments, each one a step towards something better. Aurora and Damien's story was the latter. She had come from a place where trust had been broken and love felt like a gamble she could no longer afford. He had built his life on walls so high that no one could see over them, convinced safety came from distance. What brought them here was not luck, nor the absence of struggle. It was courage, the courage to stand in the aftermath of betrayal and still leave room for hope. It was the quiet work of healing through connection, of showing up again and again, even when fear said to pull away. It was the choice to value love over the things that often divide us, wealth, status, expectation. Those things had threatened to define them. In the end, they didn't matter. Family became more than a condition in a will or a line in a family tree. It became the act of sharing the hard days, the sleepless nights, the victories that only the two of them would ever truly understand. Aurora found that love could be steady without being perfect. Damien discovered that the truest kind of strength wasn't control, it was presence. Their children would grow up knowing that their parents chose each other not because it was easy, but because it was right. And maybe one day, those children would tell their own stories about how love can begin in the most unlikely of places and still flourish. Because in the end, what matters most is not how a story starts, but the life you choose to build together.